Hi, everybody. Today is Friday, December 6th, and our friend Mark Sleboda is here with us. Welcome back, Mark.
Nima, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on Dialogue Works. And you're like some kind of Terminator machine of interviews. How many do you do a day? Three, four interviews a day?
Four. Three,
Yeah,
four.
you're insane. You're literally insane and some type of Terminator interview machine. So am I your last one of the day?
Now I have with Ray McGovern right after you.
Okay, well, we'll try to keep this to a reasonable time and so that you can survive through the weekend.
Yeah. Let's get started, Mark, with what's going on in the West Asia, in Syria. Ceasefire right after that, this conflict in Syria popping up. In Georgia, we have a color revolution going on for quite some time. How Let's get started with the situation in Syria. What's the situation in your opinion, and what are the main reasons? Because we had some sort of agreement between Iran, Russia, and Turkey. Right now, it seems that
You had a deal with Erdogan. Okay, so let's go big picture. Let's start big picture for a second. So Russia continues in Ukraine to completely steamroll on the battlefield, particularly in the south and central Donbass area. But they're effectively unstoppable at this point. The best that the Kiev regime can do is they can slow Russian forces down a few select places on the map. And the U.S. is panicking. No one knows what's going to happen when Trump takes office. Europe is losing. So the U.S., with these last 2 months, yes, Biden is trying everything he can to, or the Biden administration, whether Biden and his senility, lame duckness is actually cognizant of anything that his administration is doing is another question. But at least Anthony Blinken and Jake Al Qaeda is on our side in Syria. Sullivan are doing everything they can to escalate, to pump as much weapons and money into the Kiev regime as they can, to provoke Russia in trying to make them some kind of response that will further entwine the U.S. directly into the conflict and make it more difficult for Trump to let's not say cut a peace deal because that's completely unrealistic and not going to happen, but at least de-escalate on the US side. They're attempting to make, if that is indeed his goal or the goal of the neocons that he's quite willingly evidently surrounded himself with, that's another question. The other thing they're doing is because they can't win on the battlefield in Ukraine, they are doing what the US does best. They are going to destabilize everything on Russia's borders, wherever Russia has influence and interest. They are the masters of destabilization. So, for instance, we see this color revolution attempt. This or better term, not as a color revolution. This is an evolution. This is Maidan 3.0 attempt in Georgia, which right now it appears that the Georgian government is holding firm, and they've sworn there will be no Maidan, and that they will not repeat the mistakes that Yanukovych made in Ukraine in 2014. They appear to be holding for the moment, but street protests are continuing. From the latest I've seen is that the Georgia Dream government has gone essentially on the offensive, and they've started arresting the insurrection leaders, the Maidan leaders in Tbilisi. And from what we've also heard from the Georgian Dream government, from the Georgian police, that 1/3 at least 1/3 of all the people they have detained in the protests are not even Georgians. They're Europeans and Ukrainians and Americans and the like. So it's quite clear what this is. The other there's an attempt to increase tensions in Serbia with Kosovo again. The Kosovar Albanian KLA, Kosovo Liberation Army, the terrorist government of the NATO protectorate, has, in violation of UN resolutions, sent security forces into the Serb majority northern Kosovo in what is again supposed to provoke Serbia into a response that is again countries like Serbia. Anyone who has good relations with Russia is just going to become a target, right? Just because they are not anti-Russian, right? And Serbia certainly fits that bill. Being effectively a landlocked country now, surrounded by NATO and the EU, they're helpless. There has been a rather interesting events in South Korea where evidently the sitting president has attempted to stage a kind of an executive coup and to sideline the country's opposition. I don't want to say left-ish dominated parliament. And there is every possibility that this is also related to the events in Ukraine, because although South Korea has provided hundreds of thousands of artillery shells that were handed off to the US and then handed off to the Kiev regime, that is actually the artillery shells that they used for their failed 2023 southern offensive in the summer of 2023. Those were South Korean artillery shells passed off via the United States. But South Korea has a fairly substantial military-industrial complex, right? They have been focusing on building up and becoming an exporter of arms. Poland has started ordering large numbers of tanks and multiple launch rocket systems and howitzers from South Korea. And the U.S. would very much like to turn South Korean military-industrial complex to the benefit of the Kiev regime in Ukraine. However, this opposite leftish opposition-dominated parliament has been opposed to further South Korean involvement into that conflict. So it appears that what may have happened is that the president and the defense minister and a few others involved in this were declaring martial law, and that was to shut the parliament down, to effectively take dictatorial control of the country, to cripple the other institutions of government, right? You have an executive branch, a legislative branch. Well, this was to sideline, to cripple the legislative branch. And this appears to have failed and failed rather badly, when at least under quickly gathering public pressure, that it appears that some of the military forces backed down from shutting down the parliament, and right now, I believe that the parliament is launching impeachment proceedings against the South Korean president. So right now, that appears, that gambit, the South Korean gambit, appears to have failed. But you see all of these things happening in a very short period of time. Like in the last 2 weeks, all of this has really kicked off. And the clincher is in Syria. And this is a catastrophe, right? A jihad, a reopening of the Syrian conflict, which was a jihadi proxy war to overthrow the Syrian government. It was frozen under the framework of the quote unquote Astana format between Iran and Russia and Turkey, whereby Iran and Russia forced Turkey to stop because Turkey was primarily responsible at that point for the first jihadi war. The U.S. had backed out under Trump, and several Saudi Arabia and Qatar and others had pulled back their support, and Turkey was kind of left holding the bag. But that entered a frozen conflict, a three-way Mexican standoff in Syria that has persisted since 2019, 2020 till now, where the Syrian government controls the largest share of the country, and certainly the part of the country with the largest share of the population, some 2/3 of the country probably. And the Syrian government was backed by Russia and Iran and Hezbollah. In northern Syria, Turkey had militarily occupied up to a 30-kilometer stretch, essentially along the entire border, had driven the Kurdish population and anyone else who wasn't a Sunni Islamist from the area. And they cobbled together the largest share of the Islamists and jihadis from that conflict into what it had been called the Free Syrian Army. Now they're calling it the Syrian National Army, the SNA. But this is de facto Turkish territory, right? This is a Turkish protectorate in northern Syria. The other exception up there was northern Idlib. And northern Idlib hosted continued to be occupied by the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and a number of other Salafist jihadi groups. And it has to be said, most of these are actually international jihadis. They're not even, the majority of them are not Syrian. The head of the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is the latest reiteration and rebranding of Al-Qaeda in Syria. And even the United States admits that Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or did, and maybe they're scrubbing that right now, but even the United States had admitted that Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is Al-Qaeda and that they are a terrorist group, right? And at one point put a $10 million bounty on their leader Jelani's head. Now there's a number of other just as or even more vile jihadist groups in the Idlib territory, operating under the with some degree of fealty to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, some operating under their umbrella. One of the most notorious is the Turkestan Islamic Party, which has large numbers of Chinese Uyghurs and Central Asians and the like. But this is the 31 flavors of jihad. Everyone who could not be whitewashed enough to be put into the Syrian National Army. These are the international jihadists in northern Idlib. And they are still supported by Turkey, right? They receive funding, they receive arms, training, everything comes from Turkey. There's a kind of a pretext of separation between Turkey and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and Idlib, unlike between Turkey and the Syrian National Army, where it's open and direct and there's no question about it. Now, according to the terms of the Astana settlement, Turkey was supposed to separate the good moderate jihadis from Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and the other bad moderate jihadis. And of course, that never happened. Nothing like that ever happened. And a major highway through Idlib was also supposed to be opened up. That never happened either. So this that is the northern part. The third part of the Mexican standoff is where the U.S. military, illegal U.S. military occupation of eastern Syria continues on the other side of the river. And there they have these proxy forces that are called the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces. And this is right now it's the Kurds, right? The YPG, essentially rebranded. Even U.S. generals, yeah, it's the YPG. They're just rebranded. But there's also a number of local Arab tribes, and they may actually outnumber the Kurds in the Syrian Democratic Forces at this point. And many of these were on the side of ISIS until ISIS collapsed, right? So lots of former ISIS fighters as well. And they're sitting on top, still sitting on top of Syria's oil fields, which they're siphoning out of the country. The U.S. is siphoning out of the country, and Syria's wheat fields, and preventing any type of economic recovery of Syria as a result of all of this. And the excuse that the U.S. still uses is that they're still there to fight ISIS. Amazingly, ISIS doesn't exist anywhere in Syria except in the areas where the U.S. still has control. Amazing coincidence that after how many years they haven't been able to defeat ISIS, but ISIS has, at least not until the last few weeks, existed in the last week existed in the rest of Syria, but they're have spread out and been rebranded themselves as well. So essentially, this frozen conflict has now been unfrozen, like extremely rapidly, like rapid defrost, and turned up the heat, right? So now there's a number of countries behind this, right? Obviously, the US has their hands deep in this, in the organization. Britain and France probably as well. Israel almost certainly has some role, but I don't think it's major, right? They're just a beneficiary, maybe providing some elements. But this is Turkey. This is Erdogan, the guy that right that the Kremlin and Tehran cut a deal with in 2019 and 2020. And you could make an argument that both sides haven't fully lived up to the Astana process. Obviously, Assad, the Syrian government, has not done any political reconciliation with the Islamists, the Turkish-backed Islamists of the Syrian National Army, or whatever pretext political body is cobbled together for them, whitewashed by the West. But I'm not so sure they would, that they should have. They won the war. As far as I'm concerned, the mistake was that they didn't finish the job, was that they didn't clear Idlib of all of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and the Turkistan Islamic Party, and they didn't pressure the Turks more to withdraw from Syrian territory. Instead, a deal was cut with Erdogan. And of course, the reason for this is that both Russia and Iran want to avoid a direct war with Turkey. Turkey just has far too important a geopolitical pivot point, right? And Erdogan knows this. He has successfully cashed Turkey's geopolitical crux position, playing the U.S. off Russia, playing the West off the East, Arab countries rhetorically off Israel, back and forth. He's done a very skillful job of maximizing what he perceives anyway as Turkey's interest in this. He's a cunning and treacherous beast, right? And it is important to understand that while he is at some degree a pragmatist and an opportunist, he is also an Islamist himself. He comes from an Islamist family, his political background, his political party, right? These are Sunni Islamists. So he feels a great degree of um, similitude between the Islamists and Salafist jihadis that have been, that he's been using as proxy forces to overthrow the Syrian government. And evidently, he wasn't happy with the way things worked out. There was no political reconciliation. I think ultimately what Erdogan wanted was some type of officiation of the de facto Turkish control over northern Syria. He wanted this area kind of devolved into an autonomous zone that formally on paper is part of Syria, but in reality would owe their loyalty to Turkey. That could be essentially have the Kurdish population and all the other population driven out, and it could be recolonized with Sunni Islamists and international jihadists. Now, it has to be remembered that there are still millions of Syrian refugees in Turkey. Now, these are mostly Islamists. This is quite often the families, right, of these militants, right, and the people that hold to that view, and it's a significant portion of the Syrian population, right? We're talking 35% of the Syrian population. Now, more of the Syrian population are Sunnis. They're just not Sunni Islamists that are, willing to work alongside Al Qaeda and everyone else. But the goal was to resettle all of these refugees into this area, and that they would then owe their real loyalty to Erdogan. He's got dreams of a neo-Ottoman empire. That's pretty much unquestionable. The one thing that all Turkish political factions, right, Erdogan's and those opposed to him, agree on is they hate these Syrian refugees and they want them gone. They're a big drain on the Turkish economy. They drive down wages because they take low wage jobs, right? They're deeply involved in crime in Turkey, right? So they've been a political headache for Erdogan. And this Syrian National Army, right? It's somewhere between, at least, right, according official, some 80 to 100,000 Islamists and jihadis in the Syrian National Army. I don't know if it's really that many, but that's what that's what we're told it is. Now, where do you think they're getting their paychecks from? From Turkey, right? That they have to, Turkey has to support these. So not only does it have to support the Syrian refugees, but they have been supporting this proxy Islamist army in northern Syria. And to a lesser extent, almost certainly they're funding Al Qaeda and the other 31 flavors of jihad in Idlib as well. And this is expensive, right? It's a big drain on Turkey to keep this weapon, this cudgel. So they've decided to use it, right? And you have to figure, Erdogan, if he had fully just given up on the Syrian enterprise, right? If he had abandoned these Islamists and Al Qaeda in Idlib and the others, Hayat al-Sham, Turkey could have become a target, right, of this. It would have been seen as a betrayal. It's a double-edged sword. So as far as Turkey goes, a venture like this, where he feels that he wasn't given the right amount of respect and he didn't get what he wanted out of Syria, right? He's decided to take it by force. And he sees a window of opportunity where Russia is still involved in Ukraine and focused on that. Yeah, they're you could say that Russia is winning that conflict and there's some type of end maybe somewhere in sight, but not yet. And by all accounts, this has been planned months, if not years, in advance. Right? This shows a lot of hallmarks of, unfortunately, very effective planning and infiltration of Syria. And the first thing to say is that Russia and the Syria and well, first of all, the Syrian army and Syrian military intelligence completely dropped the ball. Like completely, like unforgivably, like shoot yourself in the head, sort of, completely were unprepared for this, and which is absolutely mystifying because I know Syrian analysts who have been warning that this was about to kick off again for several months, right? So how they could have not seen it. Russian military and military intelligence completely dropped the ball on this. Now, the Russian military presence in Syria now is much smaller than it was 5 years ago, or it was up until a week ago, right? It had become much smaller. But obviously, being so out of touch with what was going on in Idlib, I mean, there should have been satellite evidence of buildup of troops, and I can't understand the intelligence failure here on the Russian side as well, and Iran, because they have a lot of assets and interest in Syria as well. Maybe they trusted Erdogan. I can't even imagine trying to get those words out of my mouth. Trust Erdogan. Maybe they trusted Erdogan. Maybe that is part of the explanation. But whatever, the Russian general in charge of Syria has already been replaced. Like he's been shit canned in the last week. He's gone. And another one has been brought in, but Russia is trying to ramp up its presence in Syria to deal with this quickly. And to be fair, the Russian army, I mean, even the U.S. Supreme Commander of NATO forces Europe, Cavioli, he's testified. The Russian army is much bigger, much better, much more experienced than they were, 3-4 years ago. I mean, they're a much larger, much more powerful military, and that extends to the Air Force as well, right? The Russian Air Force is much bigger, right? They have probably the country in the world now with the most drone experience. Well, them along with the Kiev regime, so many assets, so many long range strike assets, everything, but the majority of that, of course, has to be laser focused on Ukraine, because there they are confronting not just the Kiev regime in Ukraine, but all of NATO, right? And that's except, well, Turkey, really, Turkey's now kicking it off in Syria. Now, like I said, it's obvious that the U.S. has their fingers in this. They've been whispering in Erdogan's ears. We have all kinds of evidence of this, but at least part of what has been going on. So first of all, it has to be said, how did they first they got surprised? Okay, how did they achieve that? How explain the intelligence failures? We can't. But what about the complete collapse of the Syrian military? Right? Because they have not put up any effective resistance that I can identify anywhere at all yet. Right? And we're going well into a week, and Syria is collapsing quickly. Very quickly, too quickly. To a very large extent, the U.S. sanctions, the Western sanctions, and the fact that the U.S. has a de facto seized Syria's oil and wheat, preventing any type of economic recovery, has hollowed out the Syrian economy. Over time, things have just gotten worse. Syrian economy is in terrible position. I've heard, anecdotal comments about the salary of a Syrian military officer is about enough to buy a shawarma a month, right? It's bad. There's no question that there is a degree of corruption within the Syrian government that there has not been any. It's just probably metastasized over the last few years. But there's also been a huge infiltration game going on. And this was probably multifaceted, right? Turkey, the Turkish intelligence, CIA, MI6, French intelligence, Mossad, right? They have been contacting Syrian officers, Syrian officials, clan, ethnic clan heads all over Syria. And they've been getting them to stand there. Promises were made, blackmail was done, very much like what happened in Iraq, right? In 2003. There has been a huge intelligence infiltration in a way that never happened in the first phase of the Syrian conflict, from 2011 to 2015. There were very few defections from the Syrian government. Now it's a completely different story. On top of this, it appears that for weeks, if not months, jihadis have been filtered into Aleppo, into Hama, into other cities around, and they formed sleeper cells that were just activated. So that added to the chaos, the perception that the Syrian military was surrounded, right? Everywhere, and they were, right, for all intents and purposes. So this has led to extremely rapid collapse. Now, as far as we know, all of Aleppo is now in the jihadist hands. And it has to be said that in the first phase of the Syrian conflict, only half of Aleppo was ever taken. The other half held out, right, until it could be recovered. Hama has fallen, and Hama had never fallen in the first Syrian conflict. They're moving on Homs now in a very serious way. And Homs is a very strategic point because Homs has the transportation, the highways that link Damascus with the Latakia countryside, where the ports, where the Russian naval base, where the Alawite strongholds are. So if Homs is taken, that severs, right? That's game over, right? If Homs is taken, it's hard to see. Now there is an attempt by Russia and Iran and Hezbollah and Iraq to send forces in now. They had better get there quick. And I don't know if they can be gotten and assembled and made useful as fast enough, because the Syrian army, the Syrian Arab army, is collapsing. Right now, we know that the Iraqi popular mobilization units, backed by Iran, trained, to some degree by Iran, the Shiites, for the most part, not 100%, but the Shiites, the ones that were instrumental to defeating ISIS in Iraq, right? When the NATO trained army threw down their weapons and ran away, it was the popular mobilization units that arrived and fought them out of the country on the ground. They are pouring into eastern Syria. But, and this is right out of the Western press, right out of the British press, America is providing air cover for Al-Qaeda. They are strafing these popular mobilization units as they enter the country. A-10 warthogs, gunships are hunting them down as they attempt to cross the border, Reaper drones, everything. On top of this, the U.S. has activated the Kurds. And although previously the Kurds had avoided, for the most part, conflict with the Syrian government, the blood is in the water, so everyone's taking a piece. And in the last few hours, it has come out that Deir ez-Zor in East Syria has fallen to the U.S.-backed Syrian Democratic Forces. Deir ez-Zor never fell. It held strong, surrounded, right, by ISIS all through the first phase of the Syrian conflict. And it has fallen as well. Cities in Syria are falling so quickly that it's very hard to see at this point, unless there is a complete reversal in what has been happening. I'm afraid that the Syrian government will collapse. That Russia and Iran and Hezbollah will not be able to get troops there fast enough unless they suddenly discover a spine. Because no matter how much Russia and Iran and Hezbollah and Iraq may help, if the Syrian army won't fight, then there's nothing they can do, or very little. And nothing, all of these airstrikes that Russia has been doing, it's hard to say if they've slowed things down, but if they've slowed things down, then how fast would they have been otherwise? Because they're still moving with lightning speed at this point. And it's hard to understand how the Syrian army that withstood this jihadi proxy war for 5 years until Russia intervened, and then did the heavy work on the ground to take back at least the majority of their country. What has happened? Complete collapse of the Syrian military. It's rotten to the core. And there are those who are saying that this is all because Assad refused to meet with Erdogan, he refused to meet with Erdogan while Erdogan was still occupying northern Syria, which I completely agree with. I mean, why should he? But as the Syrian government obviously just dropped the ball. Yes, they're operating under terrible economic circumstances and everything, but the rot of corruption and apathy set in, and it appears to have been fatal. Russia and Iran both took their eyes off of Syria to other things, that they were more focused on, and they have not, they didn't finish the job in 2019, 2020. They cut this deal and they took their eyes, and Russia focused on Ukraine and Iran focused on Lebanon and then other things. And they're building up their missile forces, all very good things. But if they lose Syria now like this so rapidly, and they lose them to Al Qaeda, and what is happening in the Western media is just mad. Like they're trying to make Jolani, the leader of Al Qaeda in Syria, into some type of Che Guevara figure, right? It's obscene, right? What would have been the diversity-friendly jihadists or something like that. The diversity-friendly Al Qaeda was a headline in The Guardian, something along those lines. The Telegraph was running in articles that yes, Al Qaeda is storming cities, but they're trying to the Syria's diversity-friendly jihadists. The Telegraph, sorry, not they're allaying the fears among the population alike. The Christians, don't worry, all those churches, everyone we killed before, those churches we destroyed, it's gonna be completely different this time. Why? Because Jelani did an interview with CNN, and he said, he's woke now. He's it's all cool. The transgenders, the Christians, everyone. Come on, it's going to be all one big party, and Al Qaeda ruled Syria now. It's yeah. CNN did a whitewashing job of an interview with him. They're not even bothering with what they did before with this manufacture of the Free Syrian Army and a Syrian National Council. No, we'll just whitewash the leader of Al Qaeda. The ISIS also, he was also linked directly with ISIS as well. We'll just whitewash him, right? Why bother anymore? It's like they're not even trying. It's obscene. It is obscene what is happening in the Western press, right? Yeah, sure. You can trust that Al Qaeda has turned a leaf and they're woke now, right? It's really sickening. It's hard to. I mean, we laugh, but it's really vile and sick. The apologism and whitewashing of shopping, suicide bombing jihadists, right? Ones with direct political links to what we have always been told happened on 9/11 in the United States, right? But hey, the U.S. National Security Advisor right now is Jake. Al Qaeda is our ally in Syria, Sullivan. So I mean, really, what do we expect? But Erdogan just gave a speech in the last 24 where he talked openly about how the opposition is driving Aleppo, Hama, Homs, and then of course we'll be in Damascus, right? And hopefully there won't be any problems, right? He's plans on conquering all of Syria right now. Meanwhile, Russia, and to a lesser extent Iran, are pretending like Turkey isn't involved in this, right? When Lavrov was asked about it, he says, well, it's complicated, and some say that the U.S. is involved, and some say that Israel is involved, but there's lots of people involved. They refuse to say anything about Turkey, right? Russian state media, RT, ran a story on the first day of this happening from some supposed Turkish geopolitical analyst talking about how Putin and Erdogan and Pezeshkian would fight the Islamists together. I'm like, what? Either you're one of the biggest morons in the world, or this is just, I mean, like, how can you even regurgitate propaganda that 180 degrees from reality? I don't understand it. But RT, even today, I checked, they're still pretending that this isn't Turkey, right? Yes, others are involved. There's no question the U.S. is involved. I'm sure the UK and France are. I'm sure Israel has their fingers in it somewhere. But this is Turkey. This is Erdogan. He wasn't satisfied with the Astana agreement, with the way it was implemented. So he's resorted to, I'm sure it started out as jihadi blackmail, right? That's what he intended. But it's gone far beyond that because they've had far more success than probably even Erdogan would have expected. Now he's going to take over Syria unless something drastically changes on the battlefield now. And it's probably too late. What that means for the ethnic minorities and religion, religious groups of Syria, for the Christians, for the Alawites, for the Druze, I don't know. Nothing good. I certainly, now I warned for years that this was a frozen conflict, that there were still hundreds of thousands of Islamists and jihadis under Turkish paychecks, camped out in northern Syria. But I never imagined that the Syrian government, the Syrian army would collapse like this, that this would all happen so fast. I mean, at this point, if they stood up and drew a line and held it, they would still have to fight the war all over again now and have to recover territory like Deir ez-Zor, like Hama, like Aleppo that never fell completely in the first war. But
Can you say? Go ahead, Mark. Go ahead.
yeah, no, I'm sorry. I'm thoroughly depressed and shocked, and
Everybody's.
maybe I shouldn't be. Maybe I've been too optimistic and hopeful, or not enough. But Russia is still attempting to. All right, right. So as far as I know, tomorrow, the Russia and Iran and Turkey, the foreign ministers, are supposed to meet again in the Astana format. And let's be honest, it will be a seething Lavrov and the Iranian foreign minister meeting with the Turkish foreign minister. But what can they do but say, what do you want? What will make you stop? Right? That will be, it will. At this point, Erdogan can dictate terms, and he doesn't have to take terms. Kind of like Russia doesn't have to take Donald Trump's terms in the United States. At this point, it does not look like Erdogan. And as far as we can tell, the forces involved in this, they're varying numbers, right? But they're saying 20,000. They've got a lot more than 20,000, right? They've got maybe 5, 6, 7 times that many. You know, if you flush every jihadi and Islamist out of Idlib and northern Syria and the areas of Turkish occupation. And the Turkish military evidently has been providing artillery fire to cover all of this. The Turkish military intelligence, the special forces operating alongside. This is, it's full court press. And, I hope that the Syrian army can hold somewhere, but it hasn't yet. And like I always say, I say I hope, but I don't, because I don't do hope. And right now, there's no reason to hope.
We've learned in the first hours of this conflict, we've learned that Iranian general went to Syria. Don't you think that this would be would be part of their strategy to just retreat all of these forces, to regroup them and use them?
I think that's copium at this point. I think there's cities,
Damascus,
there's
right
cities
now,
that they would have wanted held. They would have not have wanted the Aleppo. Maybe they were overrun in Aleppo, but to surrender Hama, to surrender Deir ez-Zor, no, this is collapse. This is not a strategy. This is collapse thus far. And like I said, hopefully, we can hope that Russia and Iran and Hezbollah and Iraq get forces there and they help the Syrian army make a stand. It could happen yet, but it hasn't, not yet. And if it doesn't happen this weekend, we're that close. If Homs falls, I don't.
it's embarrassing for Iran and Russia both.
Oh, it's incredibly embarrassing. I mean, yeah, okay, so you're winning in Ukraine. Bam! There's Syria. Gone. Like that. After all of that, after all those years, after all that fighting, to have it collapse this quickly, this thoroughly. It's yeah, it's awful. I don't know what to say. Russia took their eye off the ball. Iran took their eye off the ball. The Syrian government just is hopeless. The Syrian army is hollowed out and incapable of offering any resistance that anyone can point to, at least thus far. It's terrible. I mean, this is like the Afghan government that the U.S. set up in Afghanistan collapsing as the Taliban were rolling. I mean, it's like that.
Mm, yeah.
It's like the Iraqi government collapsing in the face of ISIS, right? In Mosul and all the way up to the gates of Baghdad years ago in that in the first phase of still the same conflict. So it's
How did you find the role of Mark? How did you find the role of Ukrainians in the situation in Syria?
yeah, they're obviously involved in this. There actually is a long history. Well, I mean, long in terms of the Kiev regime of working with the jihadists. Right? There have been, there have been, and there since 2015 at least, and still are jihadi brigades, battalions. Sorry, fighting for the Kiev regime that it was openly admitted, right? They were fighting for ISIS, right? These are largely Chechens, Ingush, Dagestani Salafists, you know, the lot of them, right? The type of Chechens that hate Ramzan Kadyrov and the Chechen government in Chechnya, in Russia. These are Salafists. And the Sheikh Mansour Battalion, Anna Nemtsova, an anti-Russian writer, did a piece on them in the Daily Beast, something 2017, 2019. But these jihadists, these Salafists, you know, quite open. Yeah, we cut our teeth fighting for ISIS in Syria, right? I mean, that open. Now we're fighting for the Kiev regime in Ukraine, and we're going to do a photo op luncheon with the neo-Nazi Banderite fascists of the right sector, our comrades in arms. Literally a photo op luncheon with jihadists and neo-Nazis, right? Because why not? Right? I mean, like, that's how vile, you know, the extremists that the West is willing to support here. And the Sheikh Mansour Battalion wasn't the only one. There's another one, the Dudayev Battalion, and others. And so, I mean, that has long been going on. But Ukraine this has been written openly in the pages of the Ukrainian press and a bit even in the Western press, that Ukraine has been cutting deals, right? In return for fighters going to fight for the Kiev regime in Ukraine, they've been providing drone technology, drone training to these jihadists, and that has been evident. But it's not even a question; it has been openly admitted, right? So there is involvement there, right? It's certainly probably much smaller than the American footprint and pales, you know, compared to this is Turkey essentially, right? That's the obviously the biggest part of this. But yeah, the Kiev regime definitely has their fingers. And what we can see is that these are not separate conflicts, right? This is all one big global war now, right? We've seen this extend into Africa, right? Into Mali and into the Sahel, where Ukraine is supporting terrorists out there. They're deeply involved in this here. Both Koreas attempt to draw both. I mean, this nonsense about North Korean soldiers that no one has ever seen, and even Ukrainian soldiers that were asked by the BBC, you know, hey, we haven't seen them. And then one of them saying, yeah, it can be very hard to find a North Korean soldier at night in the dark forests of Kursk, especially when they're not there. Right? You know, I mean, this is not me, right? This is not Russian propaganda. This is Ukrainian own soldiers, right? So, but I mean, there's no question that North Korea has allied with Russia, right? That North Koreans are almost certainly in Russia, the biggest country in the world, almost certainly most of them in the East, training, starting the interoperability exercises and that would be necessary sometime years down the road to being able to effectively operate together militarily, right? Something that Russia and China have been building for years, right? Something that NATO has worked on constantly for decades and still has problems with, right? But North Koreans aren't involved. But obviously, there's an attempt to draw both Koreas at some level, all right, into this conflict, even if only as part of the military industrial side of it. But now it has openly gone into Syria as well, and that also makes all of these other conflicts in the Middle East, the conflict in Lebanon, in Palestine, is even into the Houthis in Yemen, where Russia has supposedly been considering sending anti-ship missiles to the Houthis, who have been maintaining the blockade of the Red Sea against Israeli and Western shipping, in response to the U.S. Conducting these long-range missile strikes into Russia. You attack us with missiles under the thin veneer of a proxy hand. Well, we can do the same thing and hit your bases and warships in the Middle East. And the Houthis are more than happy to play the part there. So this is a global conflict now. I mean, this is almost certainly still the early stages of World War III, but there's no sign of it slowing down. And Russia is winning handily in Ukraine at this point, and they just lost Syria. And that's what it looks like so far. I hope things change, but there's no sign of it at the moment, and it's just the collapse is happening so fast. Yeah.
How how about China right now? These people are in a good portion of these people in Syria against the Syrian government coming from China.
Unfortunately, China is a long way away and doesn't have the type of military power projection that would enable them. I mean, they could do other things, right? If they kick things off in Taiwan, that of course, but that would bring us that much closer to nuclear Armageddon, almost certainly too, right? But I mean, China can maybe provide some funding, but China's been spending the last few years mostly working out how to continue trade with Russia while avoiding the secondary sanctions at the same time, right? They have increased trade, but they've also uh, shut down credit cards and banks and other things. They're playing a game there. I don't see China becoming involved in Syria in any kind of. They obviously don't want this, right? They'll speak out against it at the UN. They might, it would be nice if they actually provided some actual military assistance, in terms of production to Russia or, but as far as I can tell, that hasn't happened at all yet. So I don't, again, unless they opened up something in their own theater, I don't see how they can play any type of role in what's going on with Syria. I mean, can you imagine the headlines in the West if Chinese soldiers suddenly stop, appearing in Syria, right? I mean, it's unimaginable to be honest. It's fan fiction stuff. It would be nice fan fiction. I'd read it. I'd, I'd watch that show, but it's not going to happen.
As you mentioned, the reality is the way that you've mentioned, but I cannot believe that Russia and Iran, after all those sacrifices, would let this going away just like this. So
Like it's I again, they may still. I mean, they're obviously Iran is at least talking about sending their military in, right? Of course, the Iraqi popular mobilization units are under their aegis, right? Hezbollah is trying, but Israel. Even CNN admitted days ago that Israel had already violated the ceasefire 100 times, right? So obviously they're still tied down there defending Lebanon, which is probably part of the whole timing and calculation as well. And Russia does have a bigger, better, more experienced, military, but uh, how can it take its eye off the ball when it's fighting essentially all of NATO, right? If anyone has to pick up the heavy lifting here, it's Iran, right? Iran and Iraq together, because they're at some level. But can they act fast enough to save the Syrian government before it collapses? I don't know. I don't see any sign of it yet, and the jihadists are beginning the siege of Homs. So I keep looking for the tide to turn and to see a stand, and I just haven't seen it yet. And every time I check the news, I see more advances. The SDF taking advantage of the opportunity to take Deir ez-Zor on top of this, and evidently the Syrian army and whatever Iranians were there just gave up and handed it over. What through what I can only assume is bribery or blackmail or something of the sort. I don't know, infiltration, co-option, if you want. It's and that the Deir ez-Zor shock was another one, right? That I just my head is spinning trying to keep track of it, and I'm looking for some positive signs of resistance, and I'm not seeing it yet.
Thank you so much, Mark, for being with us today.
For what?
Yeah, for the reality.
Yeah,
the reality.
Hey, maybe things will turn around this weekend, and next time, it can be like, oh my, I was wrong. Thank God.
Thank you so much.
Here's to a better conversation next time.
Yeah. Hope so. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.